It's been over 3.5 years since Russia launched its military operation, initially expected to last just days, or at most 2 weeks, to swiftly overrun Ukraine. Instead, Moscow finds itself mired in a serious stalemate. President Vladimir Putin's grand strategy, after what can be described as a failure in an invasion once thought certain to succeed, appears to have shifted to a pure war of attrition based on sheer numbers. In theory, Russia held a high chance of victory at the war's outset, boasting one of the world's largest arsenals, including vast numbers of tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, and aircraft. However, what Putin seemingly failed to anticipate was the alarming rate at which Russia's military equipment is being depleted. Some analysts suggest Russia could exhaust its armored vehicles and other critical assets by 2026. Predictions about when Russia might scale back its campaign are frequent, so let's break down how much military hardware Russia has lost, what remains, and what this means for the war in Ukraine and global geopolitics. Before diving into today's main content, comment 1 if you support Ukraine, 2 if you support Russia, or 3 if you're neutral. Now, let's get into the details of today's video. First, consider hard data from Oryx, an online database tracking destroyed or damaged equipment for both sides in the conflict. As of September 2025, Oryx reports Russia has lost over 22,600 pieces of military equipment, double Ukraine's losses, though direct comparisons are somewhat unfair. Of these, roughly 13,000 are armored vehicles, including over 4,100 tanks damaged or destroyed in 42 months. These figures are based solely on confirmed losses via satellite imagery, Ukrainian drone surveillance, and independent sources. Russia's actual losses may be slightly higher, as a destroyed or damaged tank is hard to conceal, with some analysts estimating visual records capture 80 to 90% of total losses. These numbers are striking when we consider Russia's initial tank inventory and its efforts to replenish since. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies' Military Balance 2022 report, Russia had about 3,300 active tanks at the war's start, including upgraded T-72, T-80, and T-90 models. The ISS also estimated Russia held 5,000 to 17,000 tanks in storage, mostly Soviet-era vehicles in varying states of disrepair. That was the situation at the conflict's onset. By May 2022, imagery and Ukrainian military intelligence showed Russia pulling older tanks from storage, with T-62 models appearing on the front lines. Some reports at the time claimed Russia lost about 1,000 tanks, though this may have been exaggerated given later loss scales. The calculation gets murkier because Russia never stopped producing or refurbishing equipment. Estimates suggest Russia can produce about 250 modern tanks annually, meaning upgraded T-72 variants or better. Over 42 months of war, this adds roughly 800 tanks to Russia's modern inventory, which it has both used and lost. Oryx data shows about 3,100 confirmed lost tanks are variants of the T-72, T-80, and T-90, plus 500 unidentified tanks. While Russia's pre-war storage numbers are unclear, Ukraine may face about 1,500 modern tanks, with the rest being older designs used as cannon fodder. Moving from reports of T-62 tanks in 2022, by November 2024, Russia resorted to deploying T-34 tanks, World War II relics, after over 2.5 years of war. Pulling a museum piece tank from storage, refurbishing it, and sending it to face a nation using similar hardware for defense highlights how dire Russia's situation has become. Russia seems to need constant reminders that its current equipment is likely the best it can muster, as evidenced by a slow but steady decline in both production and refurbishment. Researchers from two reputable military analysis platforms note that satellite imagery of Russia's storage and repair facilities shows tank refurbishment capacity dropped from over 120 units per month in early 2022 to just 35 by mid-2025. The reason is simple. With over 5,000 tanks in storage, the first ones pulled were in the best condition, requiring minimal repairs. But as Russia loses more tanks and domestic production fails to keep pace, it must rely on older, more damaged vehicles needing extensive repairs. This issue is compounded by rising costs for imported repair materials. Meanwhile, Ukraine's increasingly sophisticated anti-tank tactics prevent Russia from recovering enough tanks from the battlefield for reuse or upgrades. Paradoxically, tank losses accelerate as numbers dwindle. Ukraine's general staff reported Russia lost 1,000 armored vehicles monthly in early 2024, rising to over 3,000 monthly by year-end. This spike is attributed to advanced drone tactics that destroy tanks outright rather than merely disabling them, combined with reduced pressure from Russian armored units. If Ukraine's drone teams gain more freedom to penetrate front lines, they can seek and destroy more tanks. Think of it like a vaccine. The more armored vehicles and infantry in an area, the less effective each drone strike due to overlapping defenses and surveillance. But as tanks are lost, survivors become easier targets, allowing Ukraine to employ bolder tactics to eliminate them. The ISS issued a stark assessment. Russia will lack sufficient main battle tanks for effective offensive operations after early 2026 if it maintains 2024's operational tempo and losses. This is already unfolding across the front. Russia has shifted tactics, relying less on armor. By 2023, reports indicated Russia resorted to human wave attacks with minimal or no armored support, most of which failed catastrophically, nearly wiping out participating Russian units. Instead of tanks, Russia has regressed technologically, using off-road motorcycles, scooters, World War II-era bicycles with sidecars, and motorbikes to ferry troops near the front. While this may seem laughable from afar, abruptly reverting to barely protected, low-mobility vehicles signals Russia's deepening descent into senseless personnel losses. To understand Russia's tank capability decline, we must also examine why their best tanks underperform. Take the modern T-80 and T-90 tanks. On paper, these match Western main battle tanks, with reinforced armor and explosive reactive armor designed to neutralize incoming rounds. Dig deeper, and Russia's claims of military prowess appear inflated. The reactive armor on these tanks may be less effective than advertised, with some found containing clay bricks or empty containers instead of top-tier relict ERA plates. Once hailed as near-invincible mobile fortresses, these tanks have fallen victim to Russian corruption and propaganda. Russian tanks are also surprisingly vulnerable to Ukraine's style of warfare, which favors top-down attacks over frontal assaults. Russian tanks feature auto-loading systems in their turrets, storing ammunition nearby for faster reloading. But this ammo compartment is protected by thinner armor than the tank's thick frontal plating. In traditional combat, this may not matter much, as projectiles follow simple parabolic paths. Drones, however, can maneuver around armor, targeting weak points like optics, engines, or ammo stores. This means a single drone can, in theory, destroy a tank outright, especially if it lacks the anti-drone protections its specs suggest. Russia has also hyped a supposedly revolutionary tank that never saw combat, the T-14 Armata. When the T-14 Armata debuted in Moscow in 2015, Kremlin claims were bold, projecting hundreds produced annually, with an initial order of over 2,300 by 2020. Years later, this shrank to just 20 test units, with Russia claiming its T-90 fleet sufficed to deter threats from Germany, France, the US, and the UK, all using Western tank designs from the same era. Yet, 3.5 years into the war, no T-14 Armata has appeared near Ukraine. Early April 2023 reports suggested Russia deployed its most advanced tank to the front or nearby. Later reports clarified these heavily upgraded tanks, including added anti-drone protections, were used only for weapons testing and minimal fire support. By September 2023, all reports confirmed Russia withdrew all T-14 Armata units from Ukraine. No official reason was given, but explanations are straightforward. First, production is limited to an estimated 20 units, with unclear numbers fully equipped for deployment. Second, the advanced technologies and weapons these tanks require may be too costly to sustain long-term, especially as Russia struggles to repair older Soviet-era tanks designed for ease of use and repair. Finally, these tanks may not be effective on the war's large scale, built for traditional tank-on-tank combat and lacking defenses against drones and electronic warfare, which surged after the tank's initial design. If tanks tell a story of Russia's depletion, artillery paints an even bleaker picture. Reuters reports North Korea supplies up to 100% of the artillery shells used by some Russian artillery units in Ukraine. Consider this: the world's supposed second strongest military has units entirely reliant on ammunition from one of Earth's most isolated and impoverished nations. Reports indicate North Korea sent containers to Russia potentially holding 4 to 6 million shells over 18 months. For context, Russia's domestic production is estimated at nearly 3 million shells annually, outpacing all of NATO combined. However, Russian forces use about 10,000 shells daily compared to Ukraine's 2,000, equating to roughly 3.65 million shells yearly, exceeding domestic production. Reuters notes Russia fell short of its 2024 production goal, manufacturing only 2.3 million shells, with the war's first year consuming about 11 million, likely depleting actual stockpiles. Missing production targets by about 25% is potentially catastrophic, as artillery was once Russia's decisive advantage in the attrition phase. Artillery, capable of outranging small drones and destroying critical infrastructure, should have pressured Ukraine's forces to abandon strategic positions. That hasn't happened, forcing Russia to rely on North Korea for both artillery and personnel. Even more troubling, half of North Korea's shells are reportedly defective. Ukrainian intelligence indicates these shells, produced in the 1970s and 1980s, may only be partially tested before transfer from old stockpiles to Russia. Russia must then conduct additional checks to ensure functionality, a task its strained military-industrial complex can't handle. North Korea appears to mirror Europe's approach to Ukraine, sending old equipment to allies and hoping it works. But there's a stark difference in quality assurance between North Korea and NATO nations like Germany, France, the UK, or Denmark, which have spent years and millions maintaining equipment later sent to Ukraine. Russia's solution to this quality crisis is quintessentially Russian: throw more substandard ammunition at the problem, hoping quantity offsets disastrous quality control. Public Russian documents reveal Moscow is rushing to complete a new TNT and RDX production facility in Siberia, 1,800 miles east of Moscow, signaling low confidence in its defensive capabilities. Russia's aviation sector faces a near-total collapse. Months after the invasion began, Russia claimed it could acquire over 1,000 new civilian aircraft by 2030. 3 years into the war, factories produced just 5. By 2025, the government slashed production goals to a fraction of initial pledges and cut aircraft production funding due to persistent delays and challenges. The military aviation picture is grimmer. A 2024 RAND report states Russia's Air Force operates at under 75% of pre-war capacity. Initially, it conducted over 150 daily sorties, pushing aging aircraft to operational limits. RAND estimates Russia lost 60 aircraft due to overuse and inadequate maintenance. Meanwhile, its military-industrial complex can only acquire about 25 new aircraft annually, including just 20 fighters, now used as glide bomb platforms rather than for air superiority. The civilian aviation crisis compounds military issues, as parts, maintenance, and technology overlap. Over 3 years of Western sanctions have severely limited Russia's access to critical aircraft components. A shortage of technical expertise, exacerbated by war deaths and mass emigration, forces Russia to scramble to replace Western aircraft with domestic ones. Ukraine further degrades Russia's air deployment by targeting airfields and bases near the border, increasing flight times for Russian sorties. This strains another dwindling resource: air defense systems. The S-300 and occasional S-400 systems represent the pinnacle of Russian air defense, designed to detect and intercept NATO aircraft since the 1970s, but both are showing their age. Essential to Russia's defense, many S-300 and S-400 launchers and radars have been destroyed by Ukraine, with Oryx documenting over 30 visually confirmed losses and over 340 surface-to-air missile systems destroyed since the war began. Exported S-300 systems have proven ineffective against advanced Western threats, with Israel reportedly destroying all 4 systems sold to Iran with ease. Russia also altered initial strategies, with mixed results. By early 2024, some S-300 systems and missiles were repurposed from air defense to ground attack. Russia quietly shifted from using precision-guided cruise missiles to firing Soviet-era S-300 surface-to-air missiles at ground targets. This required significant missile modifications, swapping thermal guidance for GPS and fitting them with fragmentation or armor-piercing warheads for ground targets like bunkers and bases. This shift suggests either naive confidence in surplus air defense systems or, more likely, that domestic ground attack missile production has hit its limit. Either way, the accuracy of repurposed S-300 systems is questionable, as they weren't designed for this role. Russia's air defense depletion is evident in its withdrawal of systems from as far as Kaliningrad to bolster closer bases. Beyond equipment shortages, Russia faces a severe manpower crisis that may prove even more damaging. Russia planned 15 new military training schools to address a critical officer shortage, but only 2 are confirmed operational. The military has lost over 1 million personnel since the war began, making Ukraine one of the deadliest conflicts of the 21st century by duration. This loss fuels a nationwide labor shortage, doubling the strain on the military-industrial complex. Russian officials report shortages of 160,000 to 400,000 workers and engineers, with conservative estimates suggesting 80,000 engineers are needed just to maintain current production. Notably, the military production workforce's average age was 45 in 2021, with only 16% under 29. An aging workforce combined with heavy casualties creates a vicious cycle. Russia needs more equipment to offset battlefield losses, but lacks skilled workers to boost output, while losing personnel who could be trained as new workers. All these military shortages stem from a basic economic reality. Russia cannot sustain this war much longer. Oil and gas revenues, Russia's primary income source, dropped 35% year-over-year by May 2025, while defense spending now accounts for 40% of the federal budget. This creates an untenable situation. Russia must increase military spending to offset losses, but its main revenue source is shrinking due to sanctions and global market shifts. The Kremlin has signaled spending cuts starting in 2026, effectively admitting it cannot maintain the current pace. What we're witnessing isn't just equipment shortages or budget constraints. Russia has operated at full capacity since 2022 after failing to seize Ukraine in weeks. It consistently underestimated Ukraine's defensive potential and the extent of Western aid, which kicked in as the war dragged into attrition. From a Western perspective, aid means offloading equipment slated for decommissioning to Ukraine, weakening Russia's industrial capacity. Any new Western military developments get a real-world testbed on Ukraine's front lines, accelerating research significantly. This is a win-win economic victory for NATO. Barring an unexpected shift, hostilities may wind down by late 2025 or early 2026 due to shortages of tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery. Russia will struggle to achieve major advances to maintain its power image before the new year, risking the loss of its few remaining allies. This leaves Putin with tough choices: drastically scale back operations to preserve remaining equipment, maintain current intensity and face total depletion by 2026, or openly pursue peace talks, which could weaken domestic power to the point of unraveling the system he built. Comment 1 if you support Ukraine, 2 if you support Russia, or 3 if you're neutral.